But men typically doesn't cry. Not because they cannot tear, but it could be because of a cultural norm that they are being brought up with, that crying is not something that is a normal thing for men to do so. And therefore, if they don't cry, that does not determine that, or that does not so-called say that they do not have depression.
Hi, welcome to the WADT podcast. We are in the second episode of the Manhood 2.0 series, where we talk about issues pertaining to men's mental health and relationships. With us again today is Eugene Chong, principal counselling psychologist at Seeding Minds. And today Eugene will be helping us to understand depression. As in the previous episode also, we will be announcing a promo code that you can use for something special. So keep listening to the end. Welcome again, Eugene.
Hello, welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so today's episode, I thought, I personally think that it's a very important topic in this time where, we have COVID, social distancing, working from home, and a lot of things happening that make this topic very relevant. So first question, what actually is depression, and what does it look, sound, or feel like?
Okay, that is a very, very important question. Actually, depression, right, is what we how it's being categorized with a set of core symptoms. And typically, most of the time, when we talk about depression, one of the most immediate symptoms that people think about, or people probably has seen before, is a very low kind of mood. And it always presents with the sense of the teary face that we see in either movies or with our friends. So there's a kind of crying episode. And of course, other symptoms that go along with it will be a sense of lack of motivation. There's a loss of like energy and pleasure in things that they probably used to do or love to do before. Of course, there's a fluctuation, whether is it more or less, both in appetite, sleep, also disturbance, and sense of guilt as well. So these are all the general characteristics of depression, besides other more severe presentation.
I see. Okay, so what causes depression?
Well, there are many, many reasons. So maybe let me introduce this biopsychosocial model to probably depict and also describe what exactly could be happening, but we are all not too sure. So normally we use this term called multifaceted so-called approach in looking at depression. So the bio aspect, right, looks at a few areas. One will be a genetic predisposition, which I think most of us would know, that although we did mention or researchers indicate that there is a kind of like connection in terms of the possible predisposition in our genes, but we are not too sure. So this could be one of the factors, followed by some biochemical imbalance. That's where I think medication comes in to manage and to curb or to help the individual to function better. So that would be on the area of biological. Psychological could be a way whereby the person experiences certain negative thoughts, certain emotional dysregulation that happens in their mind. They find it hard to regulate and also manage. So the other area, social, could be family so-called input, family affect towards their way of like their upbringing, and also it could be because of the environment they grew up with, the people that they interact with, the way they look at themselves. So in a spectrum, right, the biopsychosocial model probably describe a bit more on the multifaceted kind of like contribution towards depression.
I see.
Wow, sounds complicated.
Yeah, not anyone.
So
can
in other
just,
words, many things can affect us, right? It could be something
Correct.
within us, like you talk about personality, and then you talk about our environment, our family, our upbringing, the circumstances that we face. So it sounds like, well, there are many things that can affect us, and if we're not careful in terms of how we think, the thoughts that we hold in our minds and repeat it over and over again, could lead us down the path towards negativity, then depression. So the title we've given to this episode is feeling down. So is that an kind of an accurate name, in other words, for depression,
Um,
just feeling down?
Well, I mean, I guess in general, you can say that feeling down, but because feeling down could be experienced by most people, okay,
Yeah.
because it's a sense of like a moment in time, a situation that probably you felt really kind of like low because of things that happen. It's probably situational, it's transient. But when we talk about depression, or maybe in this term, either using the word called clinical depression or major depressive disorder as one of the key diagnoses, probably that will go further than that, further than just feeling down. But with other
Mm.
presentation of symptoms that appear at the same time, that probably cause a lot of dysfunctionality in terms of their work, their life, their daily activities, and many other areas.
Yeah. I guess for men, it's a little bit more urgent, and that's why we want to talk about it, because
Yeah.
I guess men tend to downplay, depression, starting from postpartum depression. It means after a newborn, a
Mm,
baby has been born. We often think that it's the mothers who more likely suffer from postpartum depression, but not the men. But what is actually the case is it's been underreported, because most men would just rationalize and explain it away. Oh, I'm just being stressed. Oh, I just woke up at the wrong from from the wrong side of the bed. Oh, just having a hard day and things like that.
mm,
So I guess why we are talking about this is to tell men, don't underestimate or don't overestimate yourself. Don't just bite the bullet and push through, although that is sometimes a good thing to do. But when it comes to feeling down, well, take note, all right? If it's just
mm,
lasting for a few hours or maybe a day, then yeah, it could be just one of those moody episodes. But if
mm,
if it lasts longer, would you say that's correct? If it lasts longer, like a
mm.
few days or even weeks, or a week or two, then that is really time for you to sit up and pay attention to it and do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that yeah, it's quite true. If it's just a kind of like moments whereby you feel down, I think that should be quite normal because we all do feel that. But what happens is that if this downness, as what we use in this case, right, kind of like perpetuate in for a period of time, and this period of time clinically we use it as a window period of 2 weeks, but then sometimes I don't think that that may be adequate to probably look at every single case. Some could be a bit longer, but generally the sense that here we're looking at is that a chronic. Sorry, I used the wrong word. I would say that a more like a experience whereby this individual kind of like experience the array of symptoms across a period of time. And the thing about men is quite unique is that typically when you look at depression, right, as I mentioned earlier, crying is one of the most essential kind of symptom that may appear in the person. But men typically doesn't cry. Not because they cannot tear, but it could be because of the cultural norm that they are being brought up with, that crying is not something that is a normal thing for men to do so. And
Mm.
therefore, if they don't cry, that does not determine that, or that does not so-called say that they do not have depression, but just that they do not exhibit this element whereby they express themselves through crying. And therefore, the difference between men and women is that because men doesn't cry, the expression will be a different form. And one of the most, I would say, common area in terms of emotional expression is that they express through anger. That's where in the previous talk we talked about anger. So anger is an expression whereby they use it to actually unload themselves because they are feeling really stressed, and sometimes it could be depression. So irritability as well as being restless. So in terms of the emotional symptom, that will be quite prominent for men.
You are listening to the WADT podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow or subscribe so that you will not miss any episodes. Share the link to this episode with someone you think that will benefit from it. We want to know what you think of this episode too. Please feel free to share your comments on one of our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also email wearedadstu@gmail.com if you have a question or need help. And now back to the program.
Yeah, so it's
I,
like way how men cope with depression is
Mm.
different
correct,
from women,
correct.
and I think we need to be aware of that. In fact, you talk about anger and sad. These are like seems to be on opposite end of the scale,
Yeah.
and yet it can come as a symptom, right? That shows the same emotion or the same underlying emotion, right?
Correct.
But I probably want to touch a bit again on that part on Parkson mentioned about we tend to not want to be seen as depressed or sad as men because I think we see depression, sadness as a weakness, and if someone is to be labeled as you are having a depression episode or state, then you are seen as a crazy, sometimes to the extent, or even
Yeah.
weak. Maybe that's the reason why you don't see we see that this as a stigma.
Yeah. I mean that's quite true. So I think that's the reason men tend to fan out this idea that I'm feeling down, that I'm not depressed, not because they are not feeling good about themselves or they are feeling manageable, but rather they do not want to have this image that they don't look good. They are kind of like portrayed as a person who is really weak, because that's one of the myth about depression is that it kind of like put a person or put a frame that when I have depression, I'm weak in my character, I'm weak in my personality, I'm a weak person.
Or lacking willpower.
Yeah, lacking willpower. Yeah, but
And
of
for men,
course,
yeah,
mm,
it does really make you less of a man, if you have such a quality, it seems. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just this morning, this morning I really didn't feel like doing anything. I was just sitting there and trying to get some work done, but I said, I just don't feel like doing it. I was supposed to do some housework. I also don't feel like doing it. So, of
You
course,
only feel
that's
that this morning. I feel that every time, Baksan.
so I was asking myself, oh, is that depression? I said, no, no,
uh,
probably not. So as you can
um,
see, I'm up again. I'm on a upswing again and things like that. But talking about crying, I think yeah, you might not actually burst into tears, but I think now I have been depressed, feeling depressed before. I've never been diagnosed as being depressed in depression, but I know there are moments in the past I remember quite vividly where if I'm alone, I feel like bursting out in tears.
mm,
All right, and but somehow you manage to contain yourself and you prevent it from happening. You distract yourself with other thoughts. So I think that would be a good thing for men to also understand. You don't really have to cry, because sometimes you do stop yourself before you actually do it. But just ask yourself, if you're alone right now, would you do that? I mean, do you actually feel like it's coming out already, it's bursting
mm,
at the seams, and your whole being is like falling apart, right? you know that's a real telltale sign that things are not well within you. And the right reaction, I guess, is not to man up, but to open up.
yeah.
To open up to somebody that you trust and just talk about it, so that you do not feel alone, trying to resist it, trying to battle against it, and trying to overcome it.
So I thought that the issue of being alone, being all this isolation is relevant today, right? Because there's more
Yes.
social isolation now with the pandemic, and it does affect our mental state. How does that happen, and how do you overcome it?
I mean, because as we are in this season of pandemic, right? We are typically most of the time working from home. We are alone, and actually there are actually research, right? I mean, I remember myself when I was teaching, right? There was a particular so-called area that we look at social isolation, and then when it comes to social isolation, right? There are quite a huge impact in a few areas, as what some studies actually indicated, both in the behavior, the psychosocial, and the physiological area. And what they actually found that, right, the more you're isolated, the tendency you will fall into depression, because these three areas are not met. There's no behavioral kind of like things that you're doing that kind of create a kind of healthy habits. There's no psychosocial interaction that really give you a sense of like comfort whereby you can see the person, whereby you can communicate, you can do things together. And of course, there's no physiological aspect whereby there's a lack of like what we call typically nowadays people are all in the sedentary lifestyle. They are not doing anything. They are eating. They are just on Zoom. They are just watching Netflix. So a lot of these areas are not being actually kind of like enhanced or fulfilled, and therefore with social isolation, with a prolonged period, right, it will cause many complications. And then in this particular video that was done up, I think about 10 years ago, they actually did this particular experiment whereby they get people to go into a social isolation state, and that's where they start to experience bizarre kind of like senses whereby they experience hallucination, delusion during that moment of that period that they are in.
Wow.
Yeah, I heard about that experiment too, and some of them even want to kill themselves. And I think one of the punishment in the some prisons around the world is isolation, and it can really affect the mental function, not just the physical functions. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think depression for men is a serious topic, and I think what we want men to understand is that it's not a sign of weakness. It's not an attack on your manhood. Okay, it only shows that you are human, and we are all different. I think, like you mentioned right at the beginning, depends on your personality. Your habits, your thinking patterns, and your upbringing, your circumstances. Many things can affect you, and so we are just human. We are being affected because we are emotional beings, and therefore, yeah, it's not a sign of weakness. It doesn't mean that you are weak. You have weaker willpower, anything like that. So there's nothing to be ashamed of, right? And there's nothing, no reason for you not to reach out to someone and get help. So I guess this is a good time for us to let our listeners know that we are now, talking to Eugene from Seeding Minds, which is actually a private practice. And what they do is, they help people in all kinds of difficulties as they struggle with their emotions in their relationships. So Seeding Minds, has agreed to give our listeners who contacts them and wants to make appointments to see one of their therapists 20% discount for your first 2 counseling sessions. If you just call them up and use the promo code WADT2020, and you will get 20% discount for your first 2 counseling sessions. And these 2 sessions must take place before the 31st of July 2022. All right. So we'll put the link to Seeding Minds in our show notes, and you can contact them. So please do as soon as you can.
So Eugene, related to that, I mean, getting
Mm.
help and what more, get real help, professional help. I can say that there's always that fear of the unknown.
Mm.
What actually happens when someone, let's say someone wants to get help, right? And can you describe what happens to allay the many fears that most of people may have, having to
Um,
go through a process, of counseling, like in such a situation?
I guess the first immediate fear is that they do not know what's happening. So humans tend to be quite fearful when they are not certain, when they're not in control. And most of the time, I'll try to allay their fears by telling them how the thing is going to be like. So something to kind of get them more comfortable, to have a kind of like understanding from where they are at, rather than we go straight into the whole counseling process. Because I think it's important to build that kind of rapport before you do anything more formal. Like formal could be asking them a lot about technical history, what happened, but it's to help them understand what exactly is counseling, what is the main purpose.
Yeah, so like, I mean, I can hear that it's almost like professional coaching as well.
Mm.
Although it's less regulated, like counseling definitely is more regulated. But you talk about one of the important thing is confidentiality, right, as the part of the ethics.
Yeah.
Yeah, so can you talk more about that, and how is that being assured?
Okay, so normally during the first session, I will explain to them that to kind of like reassure them because quite a number of them that I work with, they are from the corporate. So if they're from the corporate, they are also have this kind of fear whereby whatever that we share or that we discuss in the session will be made known to their manager or their bosses. I think that's the thing that I need to assure them because of this whole professional ethics that we hold on to, the idea about things that is being shared in the session will be confidential. And that is to assure them that they are not to be worried or to be anxious that whatever they share will be actually leaked out or convey to someone else. So it's confidential, but there's always what we call the limits of confidentiality. That's where I also ensure that they understand there are certain limitations that we may in such kind of environment or situation that we may have to break. For example, things like if you present with a suicidal ideation, there is you have a clear thoughts on what to do and what to kind of like attempt, the time or the place. And of course, the other area will be more serious, whereby there will be a sense of like you want to harm someone else. So besides these two main areas that normally I will explain to them, other than that, most of the time they are rest assured because their main concern is not this.
Yeah, most of the
Mm.
time, as I mentioned earlier, right?
Mm.
Sometimes an untrained person, or even people who say that they know about depression because they read a lot, right?
Mm.
Nothing compared to someone who's gone through years and years of formal training and experience. So, how do you say or decide or diagnose someone is clinically depressed versus what they call situational depressed?
Or this things like being like in a situation that you're feeling a bit more depressed, right? Okay,
Yeah.
normally in my situation, I will not really use the word diagnose, but I will do a screening test, but I will not do it. I mean, I will do it in the first session, but it will not be something conclusive. So I will take this approach that let's observe, because the thing about depression is that we wouldn't know a person fully when you just come for the first session. It takes some time. Sometimes we will take about 3, 4, 5 sessions to really evaluate whether is it really a call for depression, because it may not be really true to our first session. So I will say that take a kind of like wait and see approach, but generally I will use terms like to describe to my patient or clients that there seems to be some signs of depression, but I would not kind of like label it that you have depression, you have a clinical depression. Because sometimes like when you do such labeling, it can be quite disempowering to them that now I have this condition. It's good because in a way that I know what I'm having, but on the other hand, it's quite labeling towards the person, the individual.
Yeah, so
That's right.
you have to
Mm.
really thread on a very thin line
Yeah,
sometimes to
yeah,
say things correctly, because it does make a person behave wrongly or differently or in a very negative way if you say the wrong things and
right.
not understanding his or her situation very well.
Yeah, because you
Mm.
see, my role as a psychologist, I will try not to use a lot of such labels. If let's say they really, I mean, if they're really, really keen to have a proper labeling, or they want to have that kind of like being so-called diagnosed, I'll refer them to see a psychiatrist who can provide them the diagnosis. So for me, I would probably tell them that these are all the symptoms. It seems that you might have all this, but the most important thing about having whatever symptoms that or whatever term or diagnosis that you have, right? The important thing is that how to help you, because the crux is not so much of you have depression, because having depression as a condition, right, doesn't change anything except
Mm.
for looking at what caused it, what are the factors that contribute to this, and how can we elevate that part? What can we do?
Yeah, I think so far we've been talking about how depression affects the individual, right? You know, if you are feeling depressed or in fact you have depression, how it's infecting you and what are the dangers and all that. Maybe we want to expand it a little and see how if let's say I am experiencing depression or I have in depression, how will it affect other people around me?
Uh, that is a very good point, because sometimes, right, we thought that having depression is a personal issue, but we do not know that if I have depression or I'm going through depression, it affects a lot of people around me, because we don't live on an island by ourselves. So we have friends, we have family, we have colleagues, we have like children. So whoever that's around us does impact their own psychosocial being. For example, imagine, right, if you are having depression, in this case, quote unquote depression, and you're always having spurts of anger outbursts or having highly irritable, and sometimes you burst into tears. Imagine if you're a child and you look at your father experiencing that. What would be your impression? How would you feel? What is going on? Are there a lot of questions that's in your mind? Are you very really confused what's going on? Is it because something happened, something bad happened, or what? So this is an impact just for a child. Let's say for an adult who is, let's say, your spouse, what would that mean to them? A person who is having depression, I mean, their husband having depression. How would they deal with it, or how can they come alongside with them? Did the husband share with them what's going on? Are they feeling very isolated as a wife? That I'm helpless, I don't know what to do for my husband, and many, many other things.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I think relationships will be affected, very likely affected. And, even your friends, they might have all the good intentions, but after a while, they will say, well, I can't stand being with this guy.
Yeah.
I think depression can be contagious, right? The negativity, the
Yeah, I
pessimism,
mean contagious in the sense that it will impact people that's around you
your
because
mood. Yeah, it affects
uh,
your
and,
own emotional
yeah,
moods and all that.
and then sometimes it's quite long term. Like for example, like as what you mentioned, your friends dealing with you for such a long time, they feel a little bit frustrated as well. Not to say about your family members because they are the one that's with you most of the time. So the
That's
energy
right.
is being zapped out.
Yeah.
Okay, so Eugene, now that we've spoken about you're already depressed, so now can we just, before we close, how to prevent depression? I mean, maybe from how to, for example, not fall into this a state where we put ourselves in.
Well, that's one of the hardest questions. How to prevent depression? If you ask me, I don't
if,
really know
if
how
there
to
is a
prevent.
way, I think Eugene and people like him will be out of business.
Yes,
Okay.
in a way. I mean, yes, we can reduce the risk of depression because, as I mentioned earlier, it's a multi-factor issue. So to prevent it is really difficult, but to reduce the risk, I think that is still possible. I think that's where nowadays, right, with a lot of like input on ideas about resilience, growth mindset, it does help to reduce the tendency of one falling into depression. Because I'm not too sure did I explain this analogy to the audience before. Actually, depression is something like a illustration of a volcano. So all of us are like volcanoes. We have a predisposed set of like energy level. So it depends on how much level that we have. So the more that we have, the likelihood of a trigger that will trigger off the eruption will be easier and faster. But those who have a low dose of energy, right, it takes a bit longer, probably more triggers and more factors in order to allow the volcano to erupt. So similarly, right, if we can reduce the risk or to kind of like manage the triggers from occurring or helping the person to be more resilient in situation of such, right, to kind of like prepare themselves for future possible situation that cause stress, anxiety. I think that will help in the reducing the risk of having clinical depression.
Yeah, so I was also thinking of another analogy because the depression is about. I mean, events do happen, depressing events, sad events do happen. Something can't stop it. It happens
Yeah.
to us as human beings. So be like a tree, right? So a tree, for example, if it rains, okay, it take it as something that nourish it. Okay, water that nourishing it. Then if let's say it needs the sun, it will somehow try to stretch its arm, or branches to closer to the sun, for energy and for source of life. If the roots are have no room to grow, it will just grow upwards. Okay, so again, the resilience part is very important, and for us
Yeah.
to realize that bad things happen, bad news sometimes is pushed to us. For example, for example, don't watch too much news because news are usually bad news. I was told some of family members, and our generation lah, but my kids probably go to TikTok and now social media. I mean, what catches attention is bad news and people
Mm.
fighting and accident, fire. Just imagine you see this every day. I don't know whether it helps. So when I ask about for something like how to prevent, sometimes we can, look at nice things, happy things, rather than look at
Yeah,
the bad and negative things in life and be positive about things.
correct. That's absolutely right, because we are trying to. I mean, if we keep looking at negative things, we are accumulating. Just at a point whereby it's at the optimal, it will just break. So it's good to always look at positive things, which we tend not to do so, because sometimes it may not be so interesting. Something that's negative, that's very bizarre, tends to be more captivating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
So
And
yeah, happiness is everywhere. It's a matter of us finding it
Yeah,
the way we want it. Some of
correct,
us may want to find happiness in material things. So you realize that later material things does not give you happiness. It gives you more problems sometimes if you overdo it.
correct.
yeah,
So
I
I,
think it's
I think I
also a
like the
good
way.
habit to. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Uh, I think I like the way you kind of use the tree as an illustration. I think it kind of like bring me to this concept, which is what exactly you probably explain, is called cognitive reappraisal. So sometimes it's about the way we reappraise the situation that cause us to have different mindset and also different emotion and respond. So I think that's really, really important. Whether it's the sun or the rain, depends on how we look at it.
Yeah, another way to look at it is the detox. I think it's good to have a regime where we not only detox our body, we detox our minds, our emotions, and like the old saying, wake up and smell the roses, right? But today it's very hard to do that because we're all wearing masks.
Yes.
But there's a
Well,
good
but
thing. There's a
it's
latest research in UK that says men who wear the medical mask looks more attractive to women. So
Oh,
maybe,
wow. All right,
yeah. So
guys. But I
we are
don't want
good.
to continue wearing a mask.
yeah, for you, you're already attractive, so you don't need a mask, Paksan.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you very much, gentlemen. I mean, thank you. It was such an interesting conversation. We'll come back again on our next episode of Manhood 2.0 for more interesting topic that relates to us men, especially, and families. All right. So let's call it a day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye. This is the WADT podcast, and thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like, follow, or subscribe so that you will not miss any episodes. Share the link to this episode with someone you think that will benefit from it. We want to know what you think of this episode too. Please feel free to share your comments on one of our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also email wearethatstu@gmail.com if you have a question or need help. Till next time, this is Hafiz and Paksan signing off.